We want to talk a little bit about illegal squatting and quarrying in Trinidad and Tobago. I have with me two representatives from the Environmental Management Authority, Ms. Gayatri Badri Maraj, General Manager, Legal and Compliance and Enforcement, and Mr. Steve Lalbihari, who is the Regional Coordinator of the Emergency Response and Investigations Unit. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, the Environmental Management Authority will coordinate with state agencies to curb environmental ruin by illegal quarrying and squatting in Northeast Trinidad, because there were reports in the newspaper that on the Northeast, there is a lot of squatting and quarrying taking place, and now the EMA wants to crack down on that.
The EMA has always been involved in monitoring illegal quarrying in Trinidad and Tobago. The Northeast Trinidad has come to our attention because of a special project that has been undertaken by the FAO, improving forested areas, protected areas and management. And, that project would have pointed out that, forest cover, etc., is being decimated. All right, so that's why Northeast Trinidad came into focus.
But
yes,
it is taking place around other parts of Trinidad and Tobago as well.
that is correct.
Yes.
So how do we deal with this?
Well, first and foremost, you speak about illegal quarrying, right?
Yeah.
So quarrying in general, you could have your approvals from the EMA and the other agencies. So once those persons get the necessary approval, in this case from the EMA, the certificate of environmental clearance, there are conditions that persons have to comply with, looking at your waste stream, your water, your air, your soil, all these different things. The legal aspect comes in where persons or perpetrators move into territories, whether state lands or private lands, and they engage in quarry-like activities without these approvals. So, as Ms. Badri Maraj mentioned before, it's going to be a coordinated approach with the different agencies.
Yeah. And Ms. Badri Maraj, you mentioned the special project. Can you give us a little bit more information on what the special project is, where the northeast part of Trinidad came into focus?
The project covers all of Trinidad and Tobago, and these projects generally deal with forest cover, the ecosystems, protecting these areas. Basically, it is a project that is ongoing for about 1 or 2 years. So again, it is all of Trinidad and Tobago that came into focus. The Northeast in particular was pointed out in that project.
Is it really that prevalent up there? Because some people say, people trying to make a living as well.
In all of Trinidad and Tobago, the Environmental Management Authority looks at sustainable management. So what we try to do is we balance good environmental practices with a sustainable development. So, all of Trinidad and Tobago, we are not saying do not earn a living. We are saying whatever you do, do it, with good environmental management practices and in compliance with the law as well.
So if somebody wants to quarry, how would they get the approval to do that?
To get an approval to do quarrying, you have different tiers of the approval system. The first one is you have to get a license from the Ministry of Energy, and there is a Minerals Advisory Committee, and that committee sits and deliberates on licenses for quarrying. And it is a very good and strategic approach. And then what happens is if you do get a license, the EMA will now look at whether you can get a CEC, a Certificate of Environmental Clearance. Not everybody gets a Certificate of Environmental Clearance. We refuse CECs in some instances. So, the CEC process is a very detailed one. We look at environmental impact. Is there negative environmental impact in an area? If there is such negative environmental impact, you do not get a CEC.
Yeah. Okay. And Mr. Lalbihari, what are the effects then of quarrying? Why is the EMA looking to crack down on this?
Well, it's not now the EMA is cracking down. Our database shows that, there are numerous CECs issued for quarrying-like activity or mining activities around Trinidad and Tobago. During 2008, 2009, there was amendment of the rules, and because of that, quarrying activities did not require CEC. So a lot of applications that came into the EMA didn't really get any sort of approval per se, but just simply say that no CEC was required. When situations like that happen, then we are limited in terms of how we go and monitor and enforce and all these different things. Yes, I agree. There's a lot of environmental degradation associated with mining and quarrying activities. And as Ms. Badri Maraj mentioned, best sustainable management practices to engage in these activities. How do you treat with your wastewater? How do you treat with noise from equipment? How do you treat with emissions, dust, and all these different things? And approvals from the EMA will be able to address these things. Now, with respect to the Northeast Trinidad, it was mentioned about the Toko Old Road. The Toko Old Road actually traverses within the Milaho Forest Reserve, and that is more part of the Manzanilla windbreak system. So there's a lot of environmental importance of these areas, and if it is that it goes unregulated and not monitored properly, then you could have these issues that you're speaking about. Now, with respect to squatting, the EMA has no remit when it comes to squatting. I mean, that is something that needs to be addressed by the other agencies, like the Commission of State Lands and other agencies. But squatting is sometimes a precursor indicator that some other activity is about to take place. We've received several complaints about trees being cut down in the forest and all these different things. And then a couple of months after, we hear about trucks moving in and out, and within maybe a couple of months, a whole hill disappears in the night. So squatting may be a precursor indicator. We may need to look at it a little more closely, but definitely the EMA will work with the other agencies on how we're going to deal with this thing.
Because, Ms. Badru Miraj, there are fines attached to illegal quarrying.
Well, penalties, we call them penalties, and the Environmental Management Act, do remember this Environmental Management Act goes back to 2000. It is an old act. The penalties are, it's 10,000, 5,000. It's the penalties per day. It's 10,000 for a company, 5,000 for an individual. For continuing violation, what we call a continuing violation. So I can tell you a little bit about the enforcement process. If we discover that there's a breach of an environmental requirement, we serve a notice of violation. A breach of an environmental requirement means that you do not have a permit, a CEC, for example. So we serve a notice of violation because we are saying we're inviting you to come in and make representations. That is modern law. So you come in, you make your representation. It could be that, the EMA in its investigative process was not correct so we give you a chance to be heard, an opportunity to be heard. If we do find that you have, you have broken the law, we charge you a penalty. Now the penalty, it looks at the history of prior violations. It's a formula that is set out in the Act, and, we assess according to that. So you have one figure, and then if it's a continuing violation, for example, the penalty increases. All right, so you have a penalty, we enter consent agreement, and sometimes if the matter it's not settled, we can end up at the Environmental Commission, which is a specialized court that deals with these kinds of matters.
Do you think the fines or the penalties, as it is now, is a deterrent? Because we still see it happening.
Yes, penalties are never a deterrent, and you see it with the breathalyzer legislation. The penalties, as they continue to increase, you see the big stick approach is apparently what works in Trinidad and Tobago. So I think we are looking at amending our legislation. We are looking at but doing so in accordance with international best practice. So the penalties, whatever we look at, it's going to be measured against best practice in other jurisdictions.
So over the years, people have been prosecuted or taken before the courts in any way?
We have utilized the Environmental Commission, but what you do find is a lot of the citizenry do come to the EMA, and they try to settle the matters at the EMA. So you don't have so many matters going to the Commission, and even at the Commission stage, matters can be settled. And what I mean by settled is you enter consent orders, consent agreements. A consent order says you are going to come into compliance with the legislation. All right. So what the EMA is trying to do is get the violator, get the alleged violator to come into compliance, to come into the environmental regime, because what we want to do is manage you within the remit of the Environmental Management Act.
Mr. Lalbihari, we hear these fines, people still commit the crime, these penalties, sorry. People still commit the crime. Why can't people understand that what they're doing is wrong, and it can pose a danger to people's lives and also the environment itself?
Well, one of the role and functions of the EMA, other than coordinating with the other agencies and coordinating in general, is that of public education. And there's a very good, hardworking team of my colleagues that work in the public education and the corporate communication section. And they go out in various stakeholder consultations, meetings, and all these different things to educate the public as to the environmental issues and stuff. You mentioned earlier about whether penalties could be a deterrent or should it be a deterrent. Now, just recently, the scarlet ibis was
it was
designated as an environmentally sensitive species, and it's hoping that the penalties involved should serve as a deterrent from alleged poaching from the scarlet ibis. So, with respect to why persons are continuing to do these things, maybe lack of education, maybe in some cases they're trying a thing, but in the case with the illegal quarrying, when you look at these terrain, I mean, it's very difficult even for mobilization for an investigating team. Mm-hmm. By the time you mobilize on spot, we have challenges, you reach there and there's nothing on site, no equipment, no persons, but yet there's evidence of something that has happened before. So, with the investigation, you have the challenges. We're hoping to, as I said before, work with the other agencies because everyone has their independent process of how compliance enforcement should be dealt with.
Before we go, I want to start with you, Mr. Lalberry. What are your closing comments?
My closing comments. Mining and quarrying has been long existing in Trinidad. The purpose of it, there was a requirement for material for the construction industries, for special projects and all these different things. When they had done a study in the early 2000s in terms of demand, they recognized that there was a double in the amount that was required since the 1990s. They needed to look at options in terms of how they're going to extract, and it's not just about aggregate extraction, but mineral extraction in general. You have sand and gravel, you have pitron, limestone, all these different things. So at the end of the day, my closing comments, if it is that you're going to engage in these sort of activities, speak to the EMA. The EMA could coordinate with you in terms of the other agencies and the other approvals, and please stay within the remit of the law.
Yeah. Ms. Badri Maraj?
Well, I want to say that the EMA also has a coordinating function, and that is a mandatory function under the legislation. And we need to take the legislation and the laws very seriously. The EMA is serious about cracking down on illegal quarrying, and we are going to do so through a coordinated approach. It is not the EMA alone. We are not going to be working and dealing with quarrying alone. We are looking at the Ministry of Energy, the Commission of State Lands, all the other agencies, Land Settlements Agency. We hope to get their cooperation, and in the next couple of weeks we'll be doing some joint site visits, and we're going to have a couple of meetings coming up as well. So we do hope that the scarring of illegal quarrying across the landscape is going to be decreased, and at least we have a better looking environmental landscape in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you very much, Ms. Gayatri Badri Maraj, General Manager, Legal Compliance and Enforcement, and Mr. Steve Lalbihari, Regional Coordinator of the Emergency Response and Investigations Unit of the EMA. This is Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago. We now take you to your local weather forecast.